Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today we pick up action again with what has been happening in the United Kingdom's politics. And it is Satish Kumar Sharma ji who's joining us from Britain. Satish Kumar ji, welcome to PGurus channel.
Priyar ji, pranam namaskar and Nutan Varsha Vinandan. Diwali is almost upon us. Probably by the time this video gets out there, your viewers will be celebrating Diwali. So let me be the first to offer them all a Diwali greeting from London.
Thank you, and wish you all in England, Scotland, and Wales, and Edinburgh, and in Northern Ireland the same. And so we would like to pick up action from the point where we left off in the previous discussion, which was that over about 100 organizations had written to the Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn. So perhaps you can update us on what happened after that.
Yes, that's a great place to start. In fact, I was checking, it was only 6 days ago that that last development happened, and so much has happened in 6 days since then. So yes, 117 organizations, I think, ultimately signed up, all Hindu organizations, all completely united in their condemnation of the resolution that the Labour Party passed. And they wrote directly to Jeremy Corbyn. And in fact, 3 days after that letter had been written, an emergency meeting was called in the Houses of Commons, the House of Commons, the House of the Parliament. And it was called by the leading senior-most figures in the Hindu community in the political sphere. Many of them very long-standing supporters and donors of political parties. Present at that meeting as a signatory of the National Council of Hindu Temples, we were also invited, so I was there as part of it. And present in that meeting, we had several lords, peers, a number of Labour councillors and other councillors as well. But we had no Labour MPs who turned up. We were a bit disappointed. We had hoped that there might be somebody from the NEC who would come and talk. There was a rumour at one point that Jeremy Corbyn may even have come and spoke to us, but I thought that was a bit too much to expect of him at this stage of his development. So the gathering was there, and it was strange because we had so many high-powered people in that meeting. The outcome of it was a little disappointing, but it was an excellent opportunity to observe our community in action, united in one particular focused attempt to get a response and to reject this resolution. But still, very many people were there who have such a terrible conflict of interest. And it was quite strange that nobody realized that the conflict of interest that they were all laboring under was actually exactly the same. I raised this in the meeting. I said that the Mahabharata occurred because of a conflict of interest.
Right.
That all of the people in the Mahabharata, everybody on the Kaurava side, they were actually under a conflict of interest, and they were not serving Dharma, they were not serving the community. Whereas everybody on the Pandav side were all serving the community. And there were a number of very elderly senior gentlemen who have been in the space for a long, long time. And I had to remind them that Bhishma, even though he was the eldest and wisest in the Mahabharata, because he was on the wrong side and because his primary loyalty wasn't to Dharma, it wasn't to the community, it was to his party, that he suffered a death by lying on a bed of 1,000 arrows. And that many of our elders were probably going to have to share the same experience if they didn't realize that they too were under the same conflict of interest. So I think a lot of people left that gathering scratching their heads about their own conflicts of interest. So it was a very good meeting from that point of view. We're looking forward to seeing what actually emerges from it. A number of Labour Labour councillors did try and encourage everybody to stay and support the Labour Party, and we can change it from within. But the mood in the room was completely different. I think that bus has left. Nobody now believes that Indian politicians can change it from within. So the majority are saying the only way to change this party now is to disengage, allow them to enjoy the fruits of their resolutions and their completely uncalled for statements against India and Indians, and then we'll see what is left of the Labour Party.
Now, perhaps you may not be able to recollect verbatim what was written in that letter by Jeremy Corbyn. Perhaps you can touch on the salient points on that letter.
Yeah, so the letter that was written to Jeremy Corbyn was very, very clear. It rejected the principle that a person in the British Parliament had any right to interfere in the sovereign affairs of the largest democracy of the world. That's a fundamental principle. It's just not done.
Right.
And the letter was very, very clear and strong in indicating that. And it also reinforced the idea that what we should not do is import friction or disputes from other parts of the world here onto the streets of London. And those are the two critical aspects of it. And that letter, in fact, you mentioned it, I'll share with you that Jeremy Corbyn did actually respond to that letter very recently.
And was his how was his response? Did he touch upon the point that they were commenting about and a country's internal matter?
It's one of those very political letters, shall we say. So it treads very carefully between the various mines that are hidden in this whole issue, the landmines. And what his letter basically did is it did two things. One, it clearly established that Jeremy Corbyn himself is invested in this position. And he declares very strongly that the resolution passed democratic process in the party. Now, that is a very strong statement, because it wasn't suggesting that, oh, this was one of those minor things that seems to have happened unplanned or anything. No, it's saying this was a democratic process being conducted.
Hold on, though, Satish Kumarji. The letter, the press release by Keith Vaz said something political in the sense that it wasn't in this committee, it wasn't discussed here, or something of that nature. So I'm having difficulty trying to reconcile the two. I mean, after all, at the end of the day, and the dust settles, it's the leader whose word goes. So was Mr. Vaz coming up with a different version of the truth?
Well, it's a very pertinent and perceptive question. This was the other thing that Jeremy Corbyn's letter has revealed. We have a number of very well-established Indian origin Labour parliamentarians who have been touting and flaunting their power and influence in the party amongst their own constituents, and telling them that, no, this was one of those oddities, that it's not going to pass muster, it's not going to get through, we'll be writing to Jeremy and he will look after it, etc., etc. And so all of that spin was being pumped out into our community by the Labour parliamentarians. And then Jeremy comes along and says, actually, this was democratic process, done. In essence, what he has said is that all of their protests to him are meaningless. They haven't really had any impact, if there were any protests to him. But also he has stated now and made it quite clear for everybody that this resolution cannot be reversed except by another democratic process, which probably means the next Labour conference. Now, your viewers may not know, but today Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has announced an intention, a desire, that on the 12th of December, we would like to have elections. The government have said they would like to have elections on the 12th, which is only a few weeks away. And so that means that this conference resolution should actually be a fundamental part now of the manifesto, and indeed appear as part of the number of items that they want to be elected on. Now, there is another interesting little snippet that has arisen in this incredible world of social media. You know, one should realize, especially the parliamentarians and politicians, that very little remains hidden of what they say.
Right.
And so a video surfaced of Jeremy Corbyn speaking at a masjid earlier in the year, I think about 6 months ago, in which he passionately states his commitment to ensuring that Kashmir is one of those issues which has primacy in his policies, in his manifestos, and he wants to see Kashmir having its own independent referendum or right to choose its own political journey, which is incredible. It's no different to Northern Ireland or Wales, you know, saying, well, we're no longer Welsh, British occupied Wales, and we want a referendum. Why would he not support that? It's exactly the same principle. So this has also now been established quite clearly.
Satishji, now this establishes the fact that most of the narrative for the Pakistan lobby as well as the government has been that they kept using Kashmir as the one thing that's like a lightning rod that attracts all the attention of the people, and they kept saying that this should be ours, this should be ours, and making the people, not just in Pakistan but perhaps the whole world, that there are no other problems in Pakistan. Now that the carpet has been pulled from underneath their feet, you're now seeing some bare knuckle, completely vile display of verbal diarrhea. I'm sorry to use strong language, but that's how it feels to me, because I see some of the things that, bureaucrats who've been in foreign office in Pakistan, these guys were saying some utterly nonsensical stuff. I mean, I was shocked. Was this guy ever a representative of the Pakistani government? If this is the kind of people that exist in that government, come on now, you don't have a right to exist. I mean, anyway, that's my personal observation. So now
if I can just remind everybody, you're talking about this global propaganda exercise that's going on.
Yes.
Nobody thought to ask the Labour councillor who stood up in front of the conference and said that 10,000 women have been gang raped, 100,000 have been assaulted, and so on and so forth. Nobody asked him, oh, could you provide the evidence for those statements?
Yes.
And what's going to happen, and we're going to see this, is that very, very soon people will have open freedom to go to and from Kashmir, and all of a sudden these atrocities that this propaganda exercise has been lying about will be disclosed and revealed for what it is. And where will the Labour Party be when they realise that they had been misguided and misled by a very small vocal minority in the Labour movement?
As a matter of fact, PGurus released a video yesterday featuring Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who spent a fair amount of time in the valley reading the situation. He has given a very informed report of what is happening in the valley. We are not taking any sides. We are after the truth. And he also points the finger directly at one individual who had a selective choice of things that he wanted to show. And this person was the essential feed for BBC, for Al Jazeera, and all the other Western outlets. We have mentioned the name. Please do watch that video. Perhaps you should watch that video first and then come to this one. We leave it to you, but it is an important part of your viewing because there is a lot of stuff that is shared there, including the number of terrorists still there. So that number is coming down, viewers, and we intend to keep covering that to show and make sure that there is not one terrorist left in that valley, because once that happens, peace is going to come to the valley. Now,
well, if I can just pick that point up, we talked about people being misled. Whenever the Kashmir issue is spoken about, nobody starts their level of their introduction with the history of the Kashmiri Hindus called the Kashmiri Pandits. They ignore that completely, and it's quite extraordinary to watch white Anglican British former colonial sort of power MPs standing up and wax lyrical about human rights and everything else, but miss 40 years of Indian history which preceded the current state of play there. It's such an omission, and more people in the Labour movement are also now beginning to realise that the Kashmir story didn't actually start where these people have been telling them. If you just wind the clock a little bit further, you see a whole history which is yet to be taken into account. And so MPs like Liam Byrne, who is one of the most prominent Labour MPs, who was inciting and encouraging the protesters with inflammatory speeches, they're the ones who attacked the High Commission. He completely overlooks the history of the Kashmiri Hindus and the exodus and the genocide that was inflicted upon them. But this is all going to come out, and it's all coming out now, dribs and drabs. And I'm absolutely certain that with an election on the way, a lot more people will be looking at all of these issues before they make their decisions.
Absolutely. And viewers, it's our promise to you, Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji is going to be sharing our hangout on a regular basis from here up until the elections and beyond, because we think that there is a pattern to this madness. It started with the Congress in India, then it has spread to the United Kingdom Labour Party, and now it is also rearing its ugly head in the Democrats in the United States. I can see a very clear parallels here, and we are out to point it out to the people. you are all very intelligent. You do your work, you do your diligence to make sure that you come up with an informed decision. But this is what we see, and this is what we are presenting to you. So moving on, Satish ji, I'm sorry if you wanted to add something to that.
No, I was just going to say that Liam Byrne was one of those MPs who spurred on the protesters. And there is another protest which has been planned. And this protest is different to all of the others. The others were overtly protesting against the Indian state.
Yes.
Now, the 27th is Diwali. And then earlier during the week, an announcement was made, and it was confirmed that the same groups who were protesting and who attacked the celebrants on the Independence Day celebrations outside the High Commission, they were all planning to target the High Commission on the Diwali celebrations. Now, this is no longer targeting a state. This is targeting a religious celebration. And so we have a whole host of Labour MPs whose party supposedly stands for equality and freedom of religious expression, etc. Their offspring, these protesters who they've nurtured and nourished, suddenly announced that they are now attacking religious celebrations. Now, this is a wholly unacceptable thing, and it has been really Bob Blackman, who supports the Hindu community quite a bit. He spoke in Parliament yesterday, and he described it as a disgraceful act, that this is completely unacceptable. But the community have noted that whilst Bob was the one who raised this issue on the floor of the House of the Commons, none of the Labour MPs of Indian origin have arisen and criticised it at all, which was a real disappointment. It would have been good to hear them standing there in the House of Commons and condemning it with equal honesty and clarity as did Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this House, we defend forever the right of peaceful protest. Yet on the 15th of August, and just 3 weeks ago, pro-Pakistani organisations held violent protests outside the Indian High Commission. This Sunday, there's the threat of 10,000 people being brought to demonstrate outside the Indian High Commission on Diwali, the most holy day for Hindus, Sikhs and Jains. What action is the government going to take to prevent violent protests this Sunday?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend who speaks very strongly and well for his constituency in deploring demonstrations that end up being intimidating in any way at all. My honourable friend will understand this is a police operational matter, but I know that I've just been speaking to my honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and she will be raising it with the police. But we must all be clear. We must all be clear in this House that violence and intimidation anywhere is wholly unacceptable in this country.
Moving on, Satish ji. So let's take the specific instance of this plan to come and protest rather, I guess, violently in front of the Indian High Commission on the 27th. Now, to just bring viewers up to date, there have been 2 protests before which weren't actually peaceful, but they turned quite violent. The first one was on the Independence Day, I think, the 15th of August, where the number of people that was there was really low. There were the protesters far outnumbered the British Indians, who actually tried to take refuge in the Indian High Commission, and they basically were, I don't know, they were mistreated is what I heard. Perhaps you can throw some light on that. And I'm going to try and capture the other events too. So please, if you have, were you there on 15th August, or do you have any first-hand accounts?
No, I was engaged in some activities for our community elsewhere. And although I'd been at the High Commission only a few days beforehand and discussed the possibility of violence with the members of the High Commission there. But there were only 200 people celebrating. There were mothers, daughters, children, some elderly men celebrating Indian Independence Day, and over 5,000 Pakistani supported protesters arrived there on the day, and there were knives and there were assaults, etc. It was a very, very unsatisfactory state of affairs. And then at a later date, more protests. This has become a regular thing. But this Diwali Day protest is an aberration, and it's an escalation. This is how the whole community, and indeed the authorities, are seeing this as an escalation.
Now, on the September 4th, I'm going to touch on it very briefly. On September 4th, they threw eggs at the the windows and all sorts of, they defiled the premises of the Indian High Commission. And members of the British Indian community helped the members of the Indian High Commission to clean up and spruce up the place. Is that not true?
That's true. In fact, a lot of people reported how disgraceful it was that an embassy, a high commission of a very close friend and with whom we have a great deal of future business and trade to execute, their high commission premises should be left in that condition, that we couldn't even bother to clean it up. And so a whole group of volunteers, many of our younger organizations, they all got together one weekend and turned up with their little golden gloves on and cleaned the whole place from top to bottom.
You know, this kind of goes to say that while you know, the overseas Indians might be critical of their you know, Indian High Commission for their omissions, but we also have the gumption, the guts, and the gravitas of the situation to turn up and help you also. Please understand that we have the best interests of you and Indians at heart, and sometimes, sure, we may ask you a few questions that might be a little bit getting under the skin, but that's that's the khata meeta stuff that you get in life. So
yeah, I mean, there are little gaps here and there, and we put up with a lot. I mean, we've just mentioned this Diwali Day celebration being disrupted by this proposed protest.
yes,
you probably have noted it. Yesterday, Prime Minister Johnson spoke in the House and condemned this protest, and then today the Metropolitan Police, who are ultimately responsible for security and for policing all operational matters, is within the scope of the authority of the Metropolitan Police. They've announced that they're going to ban the opportunity for these protesters to come anywhere near the High Commission. So they can go to different routes. The routes have been specified, but they are not permitted to approach the premises of the High Commission. So that's a ban that has been put into place by the Met today.
Satish ji, explain us the chain of command.
Okay.
You know, how does it follow? Because I am beginning to have a suspicion that some Labour MPs, that you mentioned one or two, that these people were, you know, essentially pinching the baby by inciting them to go and do these things, and then rocking the cradle and asking questions of the Home Secretary. I just want to understand how the chain of command works.
Yeah, that has put it so well. In fact, I mentioned earlier that there was a spin exercise being conducted by the Labour MPs.
Yes.
And this whole episode of this Diwali Day protest has also been spun by the same Labour MPs. So we've got one bunch of Labour MPs actually spurring on the protesters. And then you have another bunch of Labour MPs who are predominantly Indian origin, actually trying to focus the blame for not banning the march onto the Right Honourable Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. And this is really revealed to the community another level of spin, because it's very obvious to anybody who makes the inquiries. Ultimately, the authority which rests with the Lord Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is the authority which then authorises the Metropolitan Police to operationally oversee every aspect of policing in London. Now, the Home Secretary does have overarching powers, but they're only ever used in times of war or acts of terror are suspected. They're not used for protest marches, and everybody knows this. And yet, all of the Labour MPs, and I think we had a new voice appeared in the social media space, a gentleman called Naveen Shah, who's been a long-standing Labour MP, but is under a great deal of pressure because of the revelations that have come out about the Labour Party. He appeared on a TV channel, and again pointing the finger directly at the Home Office, saying they were the ones to be encouraged to do this. All of the MPs have done this. Keith Vaz wrote flowery letters to the Home Secretary saying, "Oh, you must act," and then those letters were multiplied, copied, and distributed through thousands of WhatsApp groups and everything else. But the ban being put into place today by the Metropolitan Police Authority establishes quite clearly that in fact it's their responsibility to do this, nothing to do with the Home Secretary. And surely members of the opposition benches, people like Keith Vaz, people like Vrinder Sharma, people like Barry Gardner, they would have known that this was the case. Rather than trying to misdirect the community's concerns over at a member of the Conservative government, they could have come out and said, actually, who you need to talk to is the Metropolitan Police. They're the ones, let them know your concerns, and that's all you need to do. And so this has revealed a whole new dimension of spin again in front of the community from our friends on the Indian origin Labour MPs.
So this is really interesting and very hypocritical, because when they come to power, they'll be facing the same music and they will be quoted for what they did, just a few years back. Moving on, 23rd October was when Diwali was celebrated in the British Parliament, right?
Yes, it's good of you to mention that. It was actually only last night. It was a wonderful event. It's the highest, probably the highest point of the Indian socio-political calendar. Every year we have an organization called the Hindu Forum of Britain, and they look after non-religious activities, predominantly political, social, cultural, legislative, etc. And they're the same organization who were honored to host Dr. Subramanian Swamiji when he came to London. Along with the NCHT, the Hindu Forum of Britain hosted his visit and his talk there to parliamentarians and to members of the community. So this is a high spot of the Indian calendar, the Diwali celebrations in Parliament. Now, it's been 18 years since it was first established. And of those 18 years, an interesting statistic is that Keith Vaz and Virendra Sharma, between the two of them, mostly Keith Vaz, have been the primary hosts for this event. So the Labour Party has hosted this Diwali celebration for 17 of the 18 years. Now, this year was quite remarkable in that not a single Labour parliamentarian attended. The message had been sent out by the Hindu Forum in the clearest of terms, and completely in agreement with the message sent out by Prime Minister Modi ji about the Labour Party's vote bank politics. The message had gone out that Labour parliamentarians really were not going to be welcomed until this issue is resolved. Their presence wasn't going to be welcomed, and there was not a single Labour parliamentarian who attended this Diwali event. This is unity in action. The community has become really united in wanting to make sure that its message gets across to these Labour parliamentarians and reminds them that they're dependent upon their communities who they are supposed to be serving.
And I'm increasingly, getting suspicious that the entire election campaign of the Labour Party in the coming December elections is going to be bankrolled by a certain group of people. And I'm afraid if this is what they are going to do, they are going to polarize the community, a very needless exercise in a developed country, and bring out the raw emotions. And all this in the garb of doing vote bank math. I'm really sorry to hear this state of affairs now. And Mr. Keith Vaz, what is the story about a washing machine and you?
Oh dear. So you've heard about that over in India and across the water in the States now.
Absolutely.
I think it's probably
Uncle
best,
Google tells us
everything.
everything.
It's probably best left to Uncle Google to speak of washing machines and Leicester. But you're absolutely right. It's been really disappointing to see the depths at the moment with the Brexit subject occupying and actively dividing so many people. It's creating a lot of tension, it's creating a lot of heat, it's creating quite a bit of anger and a huge amount of disappointment with the whole parliamentarians and the process there. And this additional vote bank politics is a very unpleasant agreement into an already into an already volatile situation. As I said, because it's a Diwali celebration that they're attacking, this now escalates it into a religious space. And I doubt very much that the Labour Party will receive any great accolades for having done this. It's a process has started, and I've been watching it from a little bit of a distance. The one area where there is quite a bit of turmoil, but absolutely no voice, is the Labour councillors groups. We have quite a few Labour councillors who are of Indian origin. And my feedback is that in all of the celebrations, they have been excluded or they have been directly challenged. And their position of courtesy and respect has now evaporated into suspicion and disbelief in what they say. Now, this is one of those dharam sankats. It's a conflict of interest that I mentioned earlier on. And
Yes.
As Hindus, they will know also about the Mahabharata and what happens to people who don't actually address that conflict of interest. So I'm waiting to hear from prominent Labour councillors details about how they plan to address this conflict of interest, because it's so stark. They have very little options, and it would be such a shame if they left their choices and decisions to a time when they had no choice and no decision. The community would then say, well, actually, they had no choice. But we'd like to see our leaders lead from the front and set the example and demonstrate how to address conflicts of interest. So we're hoping that we will see some good news and some genuine leadership coming from our Labour councillors up and down the country.
With that, we conclude our hangout today. Satish Kumar Sharma ji, thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule to talk to us. Namaskar, and we will be back with more interesting news from Great Britain.
Ramji Ayaji, and thank you so much, and have a wonderful Diwali.
Thank you, and same to you, sir.